Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the work session of the Board of Education in Charles County. We'll start by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And for the record, there is no one signed up for public forum. Is that correct? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So the item for tonight is the budget for school year 23. Dr. Navarro.
So, Mr. Lucas, Mrs. Karen Acton is going to come forward and go through a presentation. And we are here to also take some notes and answer any questions that we can for this evening from the board. If there are questions that we may need to do some prep work, we will do so and bring it back to the entire board, and we will post the answers also for the public. So with that, maybe we can go ahead and get started with some updated numbers. We now have the state updated numbers. So Karen?
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Joining me is our budget manager, Sherry Fisher-Davis. So as we did in the original presentation, I'll give a brief overview, and then Sherry will walk us through the details. And the documents are posted up on board docs, and hopefully you got them emailed to you today, but we'll also be putting them up on the screen for you. As Dr. Navarro said, we did receive our preliminary draft calculations from the major state aid programs for fiscal year 2023 on Friday. The calculations include an increase of $17,162,226 compared to the fiscal year 22 allocation. They also released the preliminary draft calculations for the blueprint to Maryland's future, and the draft includes additional funding of $3,077,074 for the publicly funded pre-kindergarten program. The additional pre-kindergarten funding will support eligible 4-year-old students in full-day public school programs. There's in our changes to the budget, you'll see that there's an increase in mandatory costs in the amount of $12,000 due to the addition of 2 additional board members, which we did not have in the original budget. Other cost increases to be removed are the purchase of the 5 buses for $580,000. The buses will be funded during this current fiscal year so that they'll be ready in the next fiscal year, so they'll be out of the operating budget for this year. There is also about $28,000 reduction in the compensation package, salary, and benefits for the chief of schools position. Therefore, total funding for CCPS represents an increase of $30.9 million more than the current funding levels, or 7.6% increase. The total estimated state funding will increase by $17.2 million, or 8.5%, and the total county request will be an increase of $14.2 million, or 7.1% more than the current base level funding.
Okay. So we'll take a look at some of the changes between the numbers we received on Friday and our last board meeting in January. So first, taking a look at revenue, the amount requested from the county government has been reduced by $5.6 million to about 13.8, which is after the excluded items, the fiber project. So that's an increase of 7.1%. The unofficial state funding amounts have increased by $8.7 million to 17.2, which is an 8.5% increase. Specifically, the major changes from the last board meeting in revenue lines are an increase of $2.9 million for Kerwin Pre-K, about 1.7 in Comp Ed, which the state determined would be held harmless for FY23, roughly about $1 million increase in each of the following areas: foundation funding, transportation, guaranteed tax base. Special ed received an increase of about 493. So again, as Ms. Acton said, CCPS still shows an increase of 30.9 million, or 7.6% increase over the prior year. Moving on to our expenditures, we increased mandatory costs, as was stated, by $12,000 to reflect the addition of 2 additional board members. You'll also see the addition of the $3 million for the expansion of the pre-K program to coincide with the actual revenue received. We will note that there are several meetings taking place this week with MSDE, and in those meetings we'll confirm exactly what allowable costs can come out of this funding. For example, if there are no issues with absorbing the 10 Title I positions that we originally had stated, and of course the pre-K specialists, then that $3 million number that's stated here would be reduced to about 2.1, which is the net of the 3 million and the 775 for the pre-K positions and 126 for the pre-K specialists. Other changes since the last board meeting include, of course, the removal of $580,000 for the 5 buses. And as we said, we're planning to purchase those buses now, so they will come out of FY22's funding. So we also removed the reallocation of the budget line of $596,000, which was a credit because it was reallocation. We have reduced the compensation package for the new chief of schools by about $28,000, and again, that amount reflects the salary and the benefits for that position. Those were the only changes between the funding that we received on Friday and the January meeting. So at this point, we're gonna, those were the changes with the revenue lines. So at this point, we're gonna move on to a couple of requests that came in for additional clarifying questions that came from the board. First, we'll take a look at our fund balance. The current non-GAAP budgetary basis amount is about 31 million. So we'd like to note that the county government has a fund balance policy that allows for 8 to 15% of their operating budget to be held in fund balance. CCPS's amount is currently 7.6% of our operating budget. We also looked around at our neighboring counties, Anne Arundel, Calvert, Prince George's, and St. Mary's, and they have fund balances between 6.2 and 12.6% of their operating budget. Therefore, when compared to other counties and the county government, we're pretty much closely aligned. Moving on to proposed blueprint spending. The amount is roughly about 5.4 million, and we've got the areas listed there, which is the early college program, the EL position, the pre-K position, the Title I staff, and some collective bargaining assumptions. Also on here, by July 1st of 2024, CCPS must have increased teacher wages by 10%. The beginning date for this process was June 30th of 2019. At that time, the value of the EACC scales was about $106,542,000. The amount of the scales as of the beginning of this school year is about $111 million. Therefore, we have increased the scales by about 4.5%. Therefore, we have about 5.5% to go by July 1st, 2024. Another blueprint milestone is the requirement that a starting teacher salary must be $60,000 by July 1st of 2026. Again, referencing back to June 30th, 2019, which was basically when blueprint was implemented. The starting salary was $45,000, which meant we were short of our goal of about $15,000 or 25%. Currently, the starting salary is $47,248, and we are still short by about $12,752 or 21.3%. Next, there was a request to look at the CIP funding that CCPS has received versus the amount that we've asked for. So as you can see, here are the amounts from 19 to 22 that we've requested versus the amounts that we've received. So we've received substantially lower than what our initial requests were. Next, there was a request to look at the amount of CCPS's original budget ask along with what we actually received as a percent of the county's budget. CCPS's original budget request from 2017 to 2022 equate on average to about 47% of the county's budget compared to on average about 45% of what when we did receive a funding, it was about 45%. So we're looking at 47 to about 45% off the original ask versus what we actually received. And this last slide is a late addition, so we'll make sure this gets posted on board docs, but it was a request to take a look at the psychologists and counselors that we've requested over the years and how many we've actually received. So we went back to the FY19 request. So you'll see in FY19, we requested 4 psychologists. We received about 6.5. The net was basically about 7 positions. So in FY20, we requested 2 psychologist positions. We received, the number says 15, but that is absorbing 6 positions that were in a special education pass-through grant. FY21, we requested 3 positions, 3 psychologists. We ended up receiving 2. And there was just some swapping of the counselors down below. And in FY22, we requested 2 psychologists and 10 counselors, and we basically received we have on staff about 1.5 increases from the prior year. So the increase column is basically what we have on staff compared to the prior year. And again, I'll make sure that this one gets posted on board docs because this was a late addition.
Yeah.
Are there any questions?
Can I just add one clarification here that I think we may also want to post in here, is whether or not the ratios of student to counselor, student to psychologist has actually changed as a result of increases. Because if you recall, this has been a county that has had student increases every year. Not as much in some years, but student increases in student grades. So maybe we can, we'll probably do that comparison so you see the ratios, because I believe that in previous years, the asks have been to hone in on lowering the ratios, 250 to 1 student for counselors at the secondary level, or whatever those happen to be. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear that even in years where through grants or something like that, we've been able to increase the number of supports, it's a question on whether or not we've been able to tackle the ratio of students to support person, so.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Acton, Ms. Fisher-Davis. Are there any questions from my fellow board members?
Is this the time to ask about, say, for example, have you looked at the possibility of, given the fact that we're in a pandemic, summer camps, is this the appropriate time to?
Let's get through any questions on what they presented, and then yes, absolutely. Anything else? Ms. Abel?
I know you touched on it, but could you reiterate how this is going to help us get to that $60,000 threshold for the blueprint? How this budget addresses that?
Okay, so for the 60,000 right now, we are about 21.3% short, so we have to get to that point through some collective bargaining assumptions to increase the beginning teacher wage. So those will be raises. I mean, is that what your question is, or specifically?
We have to do it by
We have to do it.
2026.
Yes.
So what is the long-term plan over the next 4 years, and how does this help us get there?
So we're trying to divide it evenly.
Okay.
That's what the county has requested at this point. So as we negotiate with the unions, that's what we're working towards. Only the COLAs count towards this, so any other adjustments that we make don't count towards it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson?
Thank you for doing all this additional follow-up questioning. That this is quite a bit of useful information, and I hope that the public is really taking a look at what has been outlined. Fund balance seems to be of interest, and it's worth repeating again because there's this perception out there that the fund balance is like a surplus.
Sure.
In fact, today, I was engaged in a conversation. Could you go over, in a very layman's perspective, why we have a fund balance, the fact that it cannot be used, say, for reoccurring funds, that
Such
it
as
is.
raises, it cannot be used for that.
It is a business management practice that our auditors encourage.
Absolutely. And as we tried to demonstrate, you know, it is common practice. So what this is an emergency fund. It's a reserve fund, so that if there are unexpected expenses that come up throughout the year, large expenses such as roof, hopefully not, I shouldn't say that. Let's say heating and air conditioning goes out or something in a building. I don't want to say something collapses. Or a field has to be redone, or paving, or inside the building. Those types of things, we would not have enough budgeted, because we wouldn't be able to foresee that happen. So that's what that reserve fund is for. Best practices, it should only be used for one-time expenses. Because if you were to use it for something such as raises, that would need to carry forward into future budgets. And so eventually, you would have zero in your reserve fund. Whereas if you use it for a one-time expense, then you're making a decision that you can afford to spend X amount of dollars out of the fund balance for this, and you still have enough left in your reserve. It's just like, on a personal level, a savings account that you have set up for an emergency fund. You may take something out to purchase a washing machine, but you know you're going to be able to put some more money back in that at some point, and that washing machine, once it's paid for, doesn't have to keep coming out of that fund balance. So that's the where we need to be careful, that we use the fund balance as it's intended, which is for one-time costs, emergencies that we could not foresee. If we didn't have that, every time something like that happened, we would have to go back to the county and say, help, we need money, which would delay getting things fixed, and also would put the county in a bind, because they allocate a certain amount of money to us, and they don't expect that we're going to come throughout the year and ask for more.
And if I could, Ms. Acton, you gave one example, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's kind of three general categories that make up the fund balance.
That's
What you just mentioned are the things that we didn't budget for at all. Those things, I won't say things that get Mr. Heim antsy, but those tend to be the high dollar things. But then there are things, there are the hundreds of budget lines that, you know, you diligently faithful estimate, but there's a lot of factors that can lead into those going over budget. And so that's the second item.
Such as, if I could interrupt, you're right, I
Please.
should have mentioned that
Yeah.
health insurance is a big one.
And that's the third thing. Yeah.
Fixed charges such as retirement expenses that we have estimated. Those are big ticket items, and they're very hard to predict. So if we go over budget on those line items, we're able to use the fund balance to balance the budget, because we always have to have a balanced
Yeah,
budget.
exactly. And you mentioned that health insurance, for those that don't know, we're self-insured.
We are self-insured.
You know, God forbid someone has a very serious injury or illness that they have to treat, that's a cost that we have to incur.
That's right.
If their families, the rate of having babies goes up a lot for whatever reason, then that's a cost that we have to incur. So those three things together make up the fund balance. And I would challenge anybody to right now figure out how much you're going to spend on groceries starting July 1st to June of next year and see if you come in within 4 or 5%.
And the other major item that we use, or that we may have to use that fund balance for, would be technology replacements that come up that we do plan for them, but if it's more than what we've planned for, then, especially as we move to one-to-one devices, we will have to replace those items so that teaching and learning can continue.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Battle Lockhart?
I just have and I apologize because when I was on last time I had sound issues. I could hear some things so if you explained this before, I apologize. But the chief of schools position, is that going to be a replacement of another position, or is it enhancement of the team? Dr. Navarro, I guess that's the question.
Do you want to?
The chief of schools position is an additional position. What it takes is, right now the structure is a deputy superintendent, and then under him there are several directors and so forth. What this does, it brings a position that probably existed 8 or 9 years ago that was at the time assistant superintendent of schools or something like that. I cannot recall the exact title. And so in the org chart, it adds a position. So it puts a chief of teaching and learning that takes all of the curriculum and instructional programs. And then it does a chief of schools that oversees the 2 supervisors of principals, the executive directors. And it also oversees the director of community engagement, the director of safety, the hearing officer positions, and so then that's the addition of a central position.
I just want to make sure because I've missed it last time. Sorry.
Thank you. I have some questions unless any other board members have any other questions. First off, I'd just like to point out on that third page, there's for the public, there's almost $2 million, $1.875 million of reduction to the budget because of the attrition of 25 FTEs. So that's not filling positions that are leaving, and I appreciate the fact that the superintendent took the time to talk with folks and make that reduction because and it ultimately means that people are going to have to do more work, which is never a fun proposition to propose, but we have to understand the times we're in. So I appreciate the fact that that's a pretty big reduction to the budget. The other question I had, the $5.4 million identified in the blueprint is that you show there again on page 3. Is that money between the county and the state? Is that money that we're asking, or we're informing the county that's how much of that total that we're asking of them? The the $14.179 million that we're asking, is 5.4 of that attributable to the blueprint?
It's attributable to the blueprint and isn't fully funded by the state. So we were trying to let the county know that much of our budget, we're not getting full funding from the state at this point, and that's part of why the ask is so large.
To break it out?
Yes, so that they would have some inkling of, where our funding came from and what's left that hadn't been covered.
Well, I know, for all of us as individuals, $5 million is a lot of money, but I would think that the commissioners would see that and be giving high fives and doing black flips, because I've seen what other counties are having to pay from what the state didn't cover, and it's a much larger number than that. So I think that we're probably in a better position than most as far as the blueprint. The other item, and the money for the pre-K, so, and this is probably a question for Dr. Navarro, but do we have the physical capacity to take in all the pre-K students that would be eligible under the new guidelines of the blueprint? Perhaps in the beginning we would, but there's household income thresholds that define who is automatically eligible. And so as that goes up, as the blueprint continues, that obviously means more kids are, if they say, yes, I'd like to go to pre-K, we have to honor that. I would suspect that we don't have enough room for everybody.
So I'm going to start with the pre-K, and I'm going to ask Mr. Lowndes to fill in any gaps, which there may be several. One thing to understand about the language in the blueprint is that the pre-K expansion accessibility is not just for the school system's responsibility alone. There is also language in there about private providers and increasing those private providers. We have a requirement by a certain point in time, and Mr. Lowndes will talk to those details about that percentage breakdown of which ones are private providers seats and then ours. And we're working to think about a projection of enrollment numbers, capacity within our existing facilities, flexibility in our projection of our use of our various facilities, to really think about, are there any additional costs besides just putting teachers, the ratios of staff in those pre-K programs that we need to be thinking about. Perhaps not for this coming year, but in future years, and that's part of our enrollment growth projections in that grade level. And then also to be working with the community, with the private providers, because we are a little bit concerned about how many of those private providers there exist in the county that are ready to be able to support pre-K seats and meet the requirements that the state has put forward. So we will be also coming to you at later times talking about the work that we need to do to work with the community and the providers in the community to together be able to have appropriate numbers of seats available for students. And not just seats, facilities and transportation. So I just want to point out that as we think about pre-K, and there's additional funding for students, and Karen can also talk about the delta of how much it costs. The full cost is not just the salary of the staff to teach, but also the facility cost and also the transportation cost. And I'll let Kevin kind of add in a little bit too.
So to answer the question for next year, yes, we do have enough seats. So what we did was we looked at the number of students that we're currently serving, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, with the understanding that next year for Tier 1, it's going to go up to 300%, whereas this year Tier 1 was 75 or 78% of free and reduced meals. And so in looking at that, we serve about 50% of our students are Tier 1 students right now, and the other 50% of our students are Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. And so we would be able to absorb going to 300% for Tier 1 in that change. And what it's going to end up doing, though, is going to end up limiting the number of Tier 2 and Tier 3 students that didn't qualify for that 300%. And so that's where we are going to have to really start looking, as Dr. Navarro said, with some of our private providers to make sure that we're able to provide for all our students that qualify and want to go to a pre-K program. The other thing is that certification's changing. from the state, and it's going to require some additional certification for our aides, and we're going to have to make sure that we're there to help provide the support and the schooling that they need, as well as when we went out and looked at the certification that some of our private providers have to see whether they meet the qualifications. Many of them do not have the proper certification yet too. So we'd have to work with them as well to make sure that their folks are certified and able to serve our students here in Charles County. So we do have a big lift going ahead to meet all the requirements in the blueprint, because one of the things that we have to look at is how do we partner up maybe with some private companies out there to make sure that they meet the criteria and to make sure that we're able to work with them and get our students served both with them and within our own county. The other thing is we're going to have to change some of our pre-K programs next year to half-day, to all of them going full-day. And so what that's going to mean is an additional 7 of the programs this year that have half-day programs going to full-day. So we'll need an additional 7 programs that will be full-day next year. And that's the increase in teachers, because right now in those half-day programs, we have staff that are able to serve 2 classes, 1 morning class and then 1 afternoon class. Whereas next year, they'll only be able to serve that full-day class, and so we'll need additional staff members to do the other new full-day in our schools. So, and also when we talk about the pre-K programs, we're talking about the special education pre-K programs as well. And those are half-day right now currently, and those will have to be going full-day as well with our other pre-K programs. So we do have quite a bit of expansion next year. And we're going to have to continue to do that. And I'll be working with Mike Heim to look at what are the projections in the future and going forward with all the growth in the county and how many more seats we're going to need.
Okay, so appreciate that's a very good explanation and a daunting task, not just for us, but for other systems as well. Final thing I had, and all the items that are listed under the proposed new expenditures, do we have the personnel resources to execute those should we receive funding to do that, or is there some planned staffing? Obviously for the ones, there's line items in there for hiring people, but for all the programs there, the instructional budget increases, is that really just to buy the program or the software, or is there personnel with that as well?
Those are mainly programs we're purchasing. So those are actually programs, a lot of the ones we already have. So this is really us actually creating a dedicated budget line for them and not having to rely on year-end funding and hoping we have enough money each year to continue those programs.
Okay, perfect. And, with anything that we present, we obviously, we don't have a schedule or plan of action with this that the commissioners see in detail, but for anything that gets presented, we need to have a reasonable confidence that we can execute it. So it certainly sounds like we're headed in the right path with that. That's it for me. Any more, Ms. Battle-Lockhart? Okay.
Sorry, I keep forgetting my microphone. Does already fall in that line item that you just discussed with him? Since that's fairly, to continue doing that year over year, is that included somewhere on here? Because I don't see it. Maybe it's
That is
lumped in with
not,
something
and I
else.
think we're funding that right now with one of the Esser grants.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yes, 'cause that is something that would eventually go away once we catch folks up.
The ESSER grants
No, the iReady.
would eventually go away.
Her question was, where's that funded? And the answer came from the Esser grants.
Yes.
And so one of the reasons for implementing that was to see how big the learning loss was. So is that something we will continue to do
Yes.
Okay,
It
so-
is a diagnostic assessment, and it continues to follow students. So eventually, similar to many of the instructional programs that traditionally have sort of, we waited to see if there's year-end funding, and now we're bringing them in and saying, actually, our elementary students use Dreambox as their math homework intervention, additional support based to the curriculum, and so we want to make sure it's on the budget line item. Similarly, iReady will become that budget line item that
Okay.
we will add to the budget and say, this is a diagnostic assessment that first grade through ninth grade students are taking, and so it grows with us to see the growth of students. So it
Okay.
would be on the budget, just not this year.
Good catch.
It's a quick question.
Yeah, good catch. Any other questions? Okay. So, I know there was some other questions from board members about possible additions, so at this time, we can entertain those. Ms. Wilson?
So a couple ideas. I mean, I liked to see this expansion of the budget because, you know, our constituents, our students need supports and programs if we are trying to, you know, achieve that world-class status. We're a growing county with growing needs, and I like this layout to show that we are thinking about outside of the box type things and how we can make the learning experience, you know, more vibrant for our students. One of the things that I simply is more of a discussion, but certainly I would love to see it asked, you know, so often during the summertime, the Charles County Public Schools sponsor summer camps. And in particular, with COVID and the impacts of COVID, if there was a way that we could expand summer camps, I would like the opportunity, obviously, to be available to all students, but given the expansion of this budget, perhaps targeting our most needy, you know, and it's trying to get our hands around, you know, how many students during the summer do we typically reach based on a previous budgetary? Is it too much of an ask that we have asked for money, say, for 10% of our farm population? You know, I don't know what are the costs that are associated with the expansion of summer camps. Because our kids are going to need, our students are going to need opportunities, you know, outside of the classroom to, you know, to be nurtured. And so it just, what is that, what is the possibility of it, you know, perhaps 10% or 30% of our free and reduced meals population? And I don't know if that's the right segment. I don't know if the question should be, we should open this up to everyone, but just finding ways, because there's a constant questioning in the community of we need to have more opportunity for our kids, and I'm just thinking summer camps maybe, and maybe this is something that we could partner with our business communities if they know what our needs are, and that we kind of have a rhyme and a reason for what we're asking for. So I'll leave it to the subject matter experts.
Yeah. So if I could, Ms. Wilson, I think I saw the superintendent and everyone else taking notes. Maybe a little more specificity. I mean, summer camp is a pretty broad thing. We used to have summer reading camps, and see the folks in the back shaking their heads there. So there's definitely some history there as far as cost and who attended that. So that might be something to draw on. I do know that those reading camps were, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they were discontinued because we didn't see the positive outcome that we thought we would. And I think it had more to do with the timing of when the camp was, because it was kind of early after school ended. And just like we have learning loss and you're not in school for a while, the kids may have enjoyed that for the month, but then it was 6 weeks before they were back in school, and so they weren't retaining what they learned. And that's not to say that we couldn't do something different. Obviously, the more we keep kids engaged is a good thing. But if there's something specific, so the superintendent, if it's the will of the board, superintendent could run it to ground a little more.
I would certainly, leave it to her, for her staff to assess, but I'll give you a prime example, and correct me if I'm wrong here. The environmental center, did all of our fifth graders make it out to the day at the environmental center? Because we've had third graders that are now fifth graders never gotten the chance to go out to the Nanjamoy Center. Is there a way that we can institute a camp to make up for that lost opportunity? It could be reading, it could be math, or it could be science. And again, I know everything's associated with cost, but any opportunity to build upon expanded learning. The kids do need a break, but any opportunity that we can get them, for an extended learning opportunity, I would be curious. And we might not be able to do it because of financial reasons, but.
So I just want to remind the board where we are with extended learning opportunities, and then maybe that can also narrow your question, Ms. Wilson, or tie it a little bit. And once again, I'll start, and then I'll let Mr. Lowndes kind of chime in. So my understanding, Mr. Lucas, is similar to yours, that we had a very targeted, small summer programs before, let's say, before COVID. And at the secondary level, there might have been some credit recovery programs. At the elementary was probably very targeted for reading, perhaps somewhat for math, and tied very much to students who perhaps were behind, as students that were invited. Summer programs, for many reasons, if they are half day, they tend to be difficult for students to attend for the whole time. Families tend to have sometimes difficulty just with childcare. If you only have a morning program, how do you just come in the morning? What do you do for the other half? And if parents are working, it creates a little bit of a problem. One of the things that came forward with the federal government addressing any kind of extensions of learning opportunities is the Esser funding that we just mentioned for iReady. And that equated to last year, the school system offering a lot more students and expanding a lot more its summer programming, and looking at the time, students who had learning loss, obviously, because of COVID. Those funds continue into this summer. I'm going to let Mr. Lowndes talk a little bit about some initial ideas that he and his team have been thinking through, that look at students who we now, because we have the iReady data, we can see students who are needing supports. I just want to remind the board that we don't wait till the summer. We are right now also using our Esser funding to institute additional academic support programs. Some of you may feel those as you get emails from the school system saying, do you know that there's tutoring available for every single student, and you can log on here to receive support. Students are having added interventions during the school day when they're not quite, if they're behind or if they need additional supports. So some of the things we're thinking through the summer is obviously extending the learning opportunities, looking at our data now that we have a solid data system that is custom to every student, that is following the needs of every student, and tailoring programs to expand that learning. But I also want Mr. Lowndes to talk a little bit about some partnerships so that these programs are maybe extend and bring in some additional components that are not just solely academics, and so that we can expand some of those opportunities. And I do want to highlight some thinking at the elementary level and at the high school or secondary level, because we need to offer that range of programming. So the funding purposes, we are very much using Esser Funding to do a lot more of those programs for the summer. And I think the question is going to be, honestly, looking at the needs of our students over multiple years and how to continue that support once that funding goes away. But you can speak.
So I've been working with Ms. Meisowitz and Ms. Hungerford in the back here, the Director for Curriculum for Elementary and Secondary, and we've been brainstorming about last year's summer programs and their success and how can we make them better. And one of the things that we discussed was making it more, providing more of an incentive for our students to attend some of our academic programs, and lengthening the day because parents need more time for childcare when they go to work. And so having maybe a 3-hour academic program just doesn't work for them because they need additional time. And so one of the things that we've been doing is talking to AlphaBest and providing some time before the program in the summer, and then once again coming and providing time after, so that we can keep the kids until 6 o'clock or the normal time that they're used to during the school year. AlphaBest is very interested in it. We've talked to them. They, last summer was a difficult summer for them because they weren't able to give their workers some place to continue to work, and they lost many workers over the summer. And then when they went to rehire them to come back during the school year, many of them have gotten jobs elsewhere and weren't able to come back. So, it works well for them because they don't want to lose their workforce, and it works well for us because it provides an incentive, especially for the little ones, to come to our summer programs and then get a camp-like atmosphere, after maybe the academics that we provide on the reading and the math, that was targeted towards, the learning loss and targeted towards the iReady scores and the functional reading scores where they need the help and the support. So we are looking for some partners at the secondary level to how could we offer, and really encourage our students to come and participate in some of our programs at the middle school level and at the high school level. AlphaBest right now only serves our elementary students, and so we are in talks with them to see whether they'd be interested in providing something for an older child, maybe at the middle school or whatever, but we're also looking to talk to other programs out there that provide programs for middle schools and high school kids to be able to entice them to stay during the summer academic period of time. It's always great when you can get some work in, but then you can get some play in the summer. And it's more of an incentive to get our students to participate in our programs.
Would there be any reason just to limit it to AlphaBest? So if we talked about the daycare
So
issue
right
with
now,
regard to
AlphaBest has a
pre-K.
contract with the county to provide the before care and after care for our elementary schools.
Sure.
And so we just figured that, we already have a relationship with them. We have a good relationship. Families know them. They're confident with them. And so it's someone we just approached to see whether they'd be interested, and they are more than interested in providing this summer pre-programming and then also after the end of the day programming.
Okay.
We're not opposed to bringing someone else in or whatever, but at this time, and the contract's really not with us, as everyone understands. The contract is with the county commissioners. We do not contract with anyone to do the preschool and the after-school care. And so we went with the companies that we're currently working with in our schools, and they know our schools, and we have a good relationship with them.
Sure, maybe I misphrased the question. I wasn't inferring someone else other than AlphaBest, but in addition to AlphaBest, so someone that goes to a licensed private daycare, in the county, and again, the issues with having the qualifications be able to deliver the instruction that you're thinking about. Is that also a possibility?
So I guess we would have to look at what that would look like, because I think we're looking to provide some additional programming at the schools that we're providing our instructional programs, to entice more students to come to the instructional programs and then stay and have like a camp experience
Okay.
as an incentive to come to the instructional program. So if, Mr. Lucas, if you,
Okay, no, what you said makes sense, I understand. So there might be something set up in the science room in the lab or
Yeah.
something, so they can do that.
So our science
Okay.
center does provide summer camps,
Yeah.
and they look forward to providing them again this summer for students to come in and get a week-long camp at our summer. But I did like the idea also with the outdoor centers and how we can get them involved. So it did make me wonder with our middle school programs if somehow we could maybe piece that into the week where they get an opportunity to leave the school and go down and participate in some outdoor activities. Yes?
Sorry, Ms. Battle Lockhart?
Thank you. To piggyback off of what Mike was saying, just an example, I'm not gonna name names, but there's a lot of organizations that come pick up the kids, even from school as well, that does the same thing the Alphabet does. So I think, in the future, of course not, but I think Alphabet is where to start, because that's what we've been talking about for quite some time. But to expand to those types of centers that do the Alphabet type thing, that maybe just are located at a different location once we kind of get it going with Alphabet. So I think it's a great idea to think through, but to get all the support that we can, because they have teachers, they're teaching. So, we take this initiative as a county to streamline and get everybody on the same page. Our kids will thrive, so great idea. Thank you for.
No, that's something for me to look into. So they come right now to the schools, they pick up the kids and they bring them to their after-school program. And so if they want to somehow make an arrangement, we could probably look into that and see whether it's possible since we know where we're hosting our summer programs, and if they wanted to come and somehow make a connection there.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wilson?
So, and you hit on my next question, was the alphabets, and I think because we're in the budget cycle, every programs and services requires money, and so it's having, this is the time to have this conversation about programs and services as we ask, from our county commissioners a budget, and giving them a vision of where we're going with this and how it is all connected, and especially since we're trying to recover from COVID, and we've got to make up a lot of ground, and so if we put our vision out there in terms of things that we would love to have incorporated, so that as fundings come down, they can say, hey, is this a good fit? I don't have any other questions. I think we covered it for the after-school programs, but I certainly want to push that because our kids deserve it. But I certainly would like to talk about guidance counselors because they play such a vital role, and they're in a position where they could certainly provide a lot of supports for our kids, but there has to be the right ratio of student to guidance counselors. Dr. Navarro and your staff, are you willing to kind of take a look at the current situation with guidance counselors? Because especially, we needed it before COVID. We certainly need to make sure that we have enough guidance counselor support for our students. And I don't know what the state recommended ratio is.
I don't believe the state publishes a recommended ratio. I think the National Organization of School Counselors has a ratio of 250 to 1.
Okay.
In our budget, we have an additional 4.5 counselor asks that we bring to the board. That is to get some of our higher elementary numbers down. Our secondary numbers are somewhat closer to that established 250 to 1. It's not perfect. We're not quite there at every single place, but we're closer at the secondary level. What that 4.5 additional FTEs does is it gets the elementary in a better position. The elementary will still be a little bit slightly higher than the secondary ratios with that ask, and then I just asked the board if you are interested in us adding additional ones. The ask here from me in this budget to you is so that we could really target some of those elementary numbers that were just, the ratios were really, really large.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from any board members? Okay. So when we meet for our February board meeting, then you'll have some information for us, Dr. Navarro, on the questions that were asked?
So I just want to be clear on what the questions that were asked are.
Yeah, that's what was my next thing. So I think the one thing that we're looking for a number on is some sort of summer camp that Ms. Wilson mentioned.
So 2 questions I have for the board, just for clarification. Ms. Wilson mentioned students who had not gone through the Nanjamoy environmental science experience. I believe those are 5th graders, and we have a set of currently 7th and 8th graders who will not have gone through that experience. I actually just got an email from a parent that gave me some really good suggestions about this. And so I think the ask would be, what happens if we were to offer that experience? What would be the cost of offering that experience for the students that did not get a chance as 5th graders because of COVID to be able to do that? And I think that's the first ask that I have.
And let me just look up and down. Is that, looking down for the board members, is that something? Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
So that will be ask number 1. And then I think the other cost that Ms. Wilson may be asking about, we'll go back and look at looking at some metrics around our free and reduced meal students and participation in summer programming, and maybe doing some cost out to ensure that we tend to do our summer programming and our projected enrollment based on the Esser fundings, based on academic need. So we would look at the iReady and so forth, but we can also take a look at the number of farm students and do a cost projection to see if we were able to offer those additional seats in different programs K through 12 to make sure that we were able to service every farm student. We can bring that projection for a summer program, we can bring that projection back to the board as an estimated cost.
Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Battle-Lockhart?
Speaking of that particular comment that you just made, if we look at it from that perspective, how would bus transportation look for the farms, if there's a need, we see that high need, we have to figure out if we can accommodate the transportation as well?
Yeah, so that's what we would do. We have, when we do the summer projection on enrollment of students, we have a line item that is transportation as well, and so we would just add that line item too. So it would be a full program cost piece.
Okay.
That would include the transportation, the staffing, the meals, everything else that,
Okay.
the meals are still gonna be covered through the federal grant. We'll check on that, but
Not
yes.
sure yet.
Not sure yet, that's right. That's
Gotcha.
from the CFO. Not sure yet.
That's right.
And speaking of buses, and Mr. Herr's not here tonight, but he had a question about activity buses. And I don't know if that made it to the rest of the board members, but we talked about this several years ago. If it's the will of the board, you could just show us in February what the cost of an activity bus is. Is that board members?
So can I ask a couple clarifying questions just to make
Sure,
sure?
and yeah, and this is, I should give you a little history, I'm sorry, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask to make sure, and I may phone a friend and ask Mr. Heim to come up and just make sure we have all of the correct information. Just want to make sure that the interest of the board is to cost out after-school bus transportation for high schools, for high school, middle schools, for the entire year?
I will, so in Mr. Hurd's absence, I'll say for high schoolers,
Okay,
3 days a week, because I think that's the last model that we looked at. No,
for an
Mr.
entire
Heim?
year, right, opening,
Probably not an entire year, probably,
but the extracurricular athletic year,
correct,
okay.
correct.
And then I'm looking at Mr. Hines to see if there's another question, so we can do the math.
Yeah, so we're looking at the 7 high schools and somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 days a week. When we previously ran activity buses, which ended in school year 13-14, we ran them 4 days a week. We had 2 departure times. We had an early departure time because of clubs and tutoring that occurred at the schools, and we had a second departure time because athletic practices tended to go longer than tutoring or the clubs. So we had, depending upon the school zone and the size of the school zone and the square mileage for it, some schools had 5 activity buses departing 2 times each day, 4 times a week. And then some of the smaller zones had 3 buses, again, 4 times a week, 2 times departure each day. So we can run those numbers. And we did provide those numbers back in 2018, so we can update them again based upon the increases that we suspect will happen with driver wages and the maintenance.
Okay, if you could send that presentation that you delivered to the board members, I think that would just be, that probably would answer 90% of the question.
Yeah, we may want to just update those numbers, though. if we
Absolutely.
can. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Acton.
So to be clear, the additional information that you are asking for would not be part of the budget we present. We would
Well,
show the information to you, and then you would decide if you're adding it, or am I adding it, and you would take it out if it's too much.
so I'll look at Mr. Schwartz for this. So there's obviously legwork that needs to get done. So if we had this at our February board meeting and the board had all the information, if in fact the board wanted to add something to the budget, could it do so that evening and also vote on it that evening as a final budget, or would you have to go through one more cycle? Okay, we could vote on it. That's fine. Yes, so if just do not include it in the budget and then present it with a financial impact, and then we can take a vote that evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from any board members? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody in the back for being here. And unless there's anything else, I'll look for a motion
So moved.
to adjourn. Thank you. This motion by Ms. Wilson, second by Ms. Sable. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.